Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to introduce you today to James Norris. I first found out about James, gosh, probably 5 years ago or something in my Google stalking of all things polymath related. I found out about Project Polymath. So that was really how you got on my radar, and we've been LinkedIn and Facebook friends for a while, but this is and we've been on Zoom and we've talked on the phone, but this is, I think, the third time we've interacted. So we're still getting to know each other. So, James, to get started, and plus, since other people are listening to this, can you share a little bit about who you are or what makes you tick?
Sure thing. And given I'm a bit of a polymathic type, that might take a while, but very condensed version is I'm a kid from Houston, Texas, where I happen to be back in the moment, visiting family. And I grew up trying to learn everything there was in the world and to do as much good as possible in the world. So my journey has been mostly around behavior change and social change, but I've worked in uh, 20 plus fields in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I have been driven all this time to learn everything I could because I thought that was one of the keys for doing more good. It's also just to scratch my own itch of curiosity. So
Do you do you think there was something that made you be this way? Like what sort of sparked your passion to just excel and learn and just experience? You've lived abroad and you've done so many cool things. You've done so many things, period.
I've done a lot. Obsession is a term, but yeah, I always like to describe it as I'm driven by curiosity, altruism, and achievement. Those are my big three cores. And that, if you want to get down to the core, why anyone's motivated by anything, we're hairless apes. So we've evolved to live in an ancestral environment, but we're trying to make it work in 21st century. You can go back to the Big Bang if you want. So a lot of this is actually ultimate causes are way back in history. But the stuff that's more accessible to people, yeah, I grew up in a bit of a troubled household, and I started my first little business at 6 because I wanted to make money so I could be independent and like, try to take care of myself. And then I realized that injustice was prevalent, it's ubiquitous in the world. So I was really, really active about trying to change that since about 12. So I was the obsessive type, trying to volunteer as much as possible. I got started doing Earth Club. I was like trying to, I was actually recycling the blue bins in my elementary, middle school at the time. And that was like how I got started. And I started doing a bunch of other organizations, like the ones like in my high school that I could volunteer for, and I started building them. But I just, yeah, the curiosity and the desire to do good for others. It's a bit selfish too. I mean, I wanted my younger self to be able to get a better life too. So
Yeah,
yeah, I
I
think many,
resonate. Can
yeah,
we talk about that for a minute? Because this rarely comes up on my channel where someone's like, either they had pretty functional childhoods or they just don't want to talk about it. But you're pretty honest and brave, and I am too. I had a really dysfunctional childhood, and that's part of what led me to become so capable because I wanted to have a better life than the ones I witnessed. I didn't want to be stuck in that.
yeah, post-traumatic growth explains quite a bit of it. Also genetics, right? Like I'm an IVF kid. My mom really wanted to have kids. My dad couldn't, so she made it happen. And like there was a sense of like, all right, let's make the best possible framing we could for these kids. There's three of us. My mom did that, so I was like, I inherited her drive for making things happen and her altruism. She was like, give the shirt off her back to anyone, like try to help out everyone that she could. So yeah, it's just in me, and it's been in me for a long time.
What
Wow. Okay. Maybe we also have some dogs present with us. Do you want to start over?
I barely even heard it.
Well, we have yeah, some contributors to the call. There are sorry,
It's
there's six.
okay. I know I've heard some banging in my background, so anyway. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. It's super casual around here. Um, so you had a dysfunctional childhood and you were driven to achieve. Can you like kind of walk us through in a little bit more detail? Like, well, what have you done? Where have you lived? Like, who have you met? Like, what's your polymathic combination like?
Yeah. So started reading encyclopedias for fun when I was like 12, 13. Started getting the actual encyclopedias and the CD-ROMs, which is a big deal. It's like finally get a few, got the Encarta that got the bookshelf and so on. And then, of course, when Wikipedia came out, I read it. Not all of it, obviously, but you try, and then you realize it's folly. So that kind of obsession was prevalent. When I got to high school, I was able to build things that reflected my values and interests. So when I was 15, I competed in this international space settlement design competition. So put a 15-year-old at NASA, at Johnson Space Center in Houston, and say, go and try to invent the future. It's a polymathic approach because it's not just one thing. It's the hardware, it's the software, it's the human side, it's the automation side. All these different factors had to go into making a good design. And I did that 9 times. So I was one of the more, I think I did it more than anyone else in the world. So some people do like sports or academic decathlon. We didn't have either in my high school. So I did this and I built a club around it, and I built an astronomy club around it. And then I started doing speech and debate. So I helped build that club. So by that time, high school was, all right, I can build things, I can create things. And fast feedback loops, right? A lot of us are motivated by like achieving on the short term. So you get an immediate win, or you learn something, or you prove yourself wrong. So learning that you're wrong is great. And yeah, that kept on going. So that was all Houston. Then I went to Austin, the University of Texas at Austin. Kept on going. My first year, I would not let myself build anything. So I had no clubs. I was just doing my major. It was astronomy at the time.
Didn't you end
And
up triple majoring?
yeah, so I let myself go wild the second year. I started building organizations. I let myself add majors and minors. So I was a triple major, quadruple minor with 2 other programs. And that was, hey, the school let me do flat rate tuition. So my year, I think the second year, they let us like take as many classes as you want for the same amount of money. So normally it's like a 14-hour load. You could take more. So like my last year, I took 60 hours in that year across spring, summer, and fall, I think. And I graduated. Now this is not a great story because I actually wasn't doing that well academically until I got later on. I was just learning a lot and doing things. I was building Red Cross, I was doing disaster response, I was doing a lot of Shotokan karate and things like that. And I didn't put as much focus on academics, right? But I did well in the end, but it took some learning how to do that. And so I made up for volume. I just studied everything I could. And soon after, I wanted to go build a university. We can get to that. But it was good times. This was Austin. I ended up choosing to work with my mentor at the time on a startup that was trying to build a edutainment type of facility. So imagine a little bit of Disney World, a little bit of NASCAR. So it was called Roadster USA. And we'd raised $7 million. So I was able to get started. My mentor had done that. And I came on to help him build it. We almost launched. We didn't. Long story there, but it was from college to like startup land, just immediately jumping in and trying to build something new that people didn't quite get, but like education and entertainment together and a sort of museum store type of vibe. It's even hard to explain it, but it looked cool. And then from there, I kept on going. So that gets you up to like college and post. But if you want to go into detail, like many different cities, many different companies, many different communities, you can go into it if you want. But when
Yeah, you
you're,
want to
yeah,
share some highlights maybe of like things that stood out and were really formative and impactful. That'd be great to just hear more about your journey.
maybe most relevant to this audience is about 2008, I met Michael Barntham. Actually, not in person. I haven't met him in person yet, but to this day, I think he's like a modern day Da Vinci, one of the smartest, most capable people I've ever worked with. And he had this vision that I've had for a long time, and he'd already been building Project Polymath. And so I think I was the first one to find him through the INTJ group in Facebook. And we just connected and we really resonated. And I started joining him early days to build Project Polymath, which was the university we all wanted. Because back then I'd forced my university to work for me. Most of my peers hadn't. And like they didn't quite capture what they wanted academically or socially or physically, emotionally. A lot of the things that are important for like flourishing or full development, a university doesn't capture that well. Especially if you're broad-minded, polymathic, you really don't want to do just one major, one minor. get out, get a job.
Yeah.
Like that was anathema to well-being. So we wanted to build a physical space that was also maybe online at some point, which would be a home for today's Da Vinci's, people that did not fit into singular boxes or categories. And that went reasonably well. We were young and ambitious and in some ways naive and clueless, though this is how things go. We did get it to the point where a VC was going to invest, and then they pulled out after something like 9 months. So that sort of demoralized us quite a bit. But we had a few thousand people that were connected online in the community, taking some courses that mostly Michael had developed. And yeah, we had different teachers who would come in and try to produce content, and then we tried to arrange it such that we could get accreditation at some point. So a lot of this was like building up to building that competitor to MIT or Stanford or IIT or something. And in a nice way, we were not trying to necessarily compete directly. We're trying to take the folks that don't fit. You don't put like a square into a round hole. And so a lot of the folks that, and these are Polygon type of people, they didn't have a home. So we wanted to take them and give them that home. So that was fun.
I know the feeling. That's why I made Polymath Place, because I was trying to make it wasn't a university model, but there is a need. Like it's such a lonely journey when you're a polymathic person, especially we've been in this age of specialization. And I just give you guys kudos for trying to do something about it, even if it didn't ultimately like become what you had hoped. Like you did it though. You did it for a while and that's part of your history. And I think it's great that you and Michael and others did that.
Mhm. It's still there. At some point, maybe we do resurrect. At least my work post that has been about creating these polymathic self-actualized change agents, trying to get people that can see the world a little bit more clearly and then take action to do something about the massive amounts of challenges we face. So at least what I've done with my latest company feels a little bit like that, because you have to know so much to be able to set good strategy and do things in the world. And when you're young, you don't know. You just like start up and do stuff. When you get a bit older, you're maybe more strategic and more careful. So we can dive into that if you want. But
Sure.
well, I could just basically like summarize my whole past and say, well, damn, I didn't quite do much. I tried, but in really, really thinking deeply about like lots of experiments. So for the listeners, I founded, co-founded, or co-built 25 organizations, including 3 in high school, 7 in college, and then the rest after. Some of these were just small groups like meetup groups and so on. And some were businesses that had lit up small businesses. And then some were like I guess the most prominent is Effective Altruism Global, which is this international conference series for effective altruists. We're trying to use evidence and reason to do the most good for the world. So a whole range of organizations. And I also advised a whole lot other than that, and sometimes in the incubation side. So I've been at the forefront of building things and trying things for a long time. And in the end, you can do a lot of things and they look good, but if you really want to make impact with your life, with your legacy, then to think strategically about what that counterfactual impact is. Meaning, if you didn't do that organization, you didn't build that university, for example, would someone else have done it? So in 2008, no one was doing this. So we were blue skies, blue ocean, trying to create something new. And if we had succeeded, I think in the last 15 or so years, we'd have this space which had probably generated billions of dollars of endowment by now, because it's also an incubator in a sense. That model was a little bit like students can go whatever time frame they really wanted. All the different academic areas were integrated, and you would do a major. You'd basically pick a major project like in the arts or in engineering or science, and that would be your capstone. So like for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, you might try to invent like a type of car that runs on a different fuel source. Or if you're doing an art focus, you might try to create a new type of art that also wins awards. Maybe for the entrepreneurial engineer type, you try to build an organization that draws upon your academic interests, but then eventually goes and serves customers and maybe exits. So we would sort of joke that the the grades you got were like, did you get the patents or the publications, or did you get the awards or so on? Not that you should really focus on that per se, but as at least a little bit of a real world use cases. And then framing those students and I've done and towards the things that are most useful and most aligned to your values and your interests. But I find most of us get distracted a lot by what's shiny and new and what looks good. So right now there's maybe tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people building AI startups off of LLMs, and a lot of them forget that, well, the people that created this hold a lot of the power. So OpenAI and others will have a lot of ability to influence your startup and your organization because they're piping you the data and the models. So it's like a little bit thinking, okay, is that really what you want to do? Do a fast, easy thing that might get cannibalized pretty soon or already has by a larger player. So this is what I
Yeah.
mean to thinking deeply about what you're trying to do. And to wrap it up with my story, most of the things I've built, like half of them are still going, but very few of them achieved like massive success at a global scale. And most of them weren't attempting to do that. But in retrospect, I would have framed a lot of that as like pick one or two or three or four really big efforts and like go all in on them, as opposed to doing so much just random stuff. It wasn't completely random, like I actually understood what I was trying to do, but in retrospect, I could do things differently. Does that make sense in terms of
Yeah.
like,
Oh, I resonate so bad. Just like right now in my life, just to share for comparison, like I have 6 businesses or brands in 3 industries I'm managing right now, and I'm overwhelmed. Like I promote Polymathy and I've done it, and there are downsides to overdoing it
mhm,
that I realize, like when you're stretched too thin, everything slows down. So another thing I've struggled with, and you touched upon it, and I'd like to go and dive in there for a little bit. So I have been doing probably 2 full-time job equivalent uh volunteer humanitarian work I think the world needs. Like I was able to basically stop working a traditional 9 to 5, use some real estate to pay my bills. I live in my basement, as you know. It's a nice basement, but I use real estate to kind of pay my bills and scrape by, and I basically full-time promote polymathy and criminal justice reform in the US because those are causes I care about. I want to use my life as a force that is part of the effort to reduce human suffering and enhance human thriving. Like that is the mission of my life. And I'm really dedicated to doing that. But there's this part of me that is very afraid that like all this work I'm doing won't make any difference, you know? And so
mhm.
I've been in this space of like, well, what if I'll never know. Like what if what I'm doing and trying to do doesn't work the way I envision? Or what if what my voice is doing really isn't accomplishing that much, but I still feel like I have to keep going because I care. So like, does this resonate with you? Like, how do you keep going when you're not sure anything you're doing is going to succeed, but you care? So, like, what story do you tell in your mind about that conundrum?
That's a really good question. And I think most of the old school polymath types will understand. You can try to learn and do, and eventually you get a little tired, a little bit more seasoned, is a way I might describe it. Um, to each their own is one thing. So some people choose to step out of their arena and go off and live in Bali, where I was for the last 5 years. I was still working, but some people choose to double down and go more myopic into like one or two, three things that really fits for them. And some try to do it all and expand. So this is the Elon Musk type. You expand by having more capital usually, or you have a brand which can draw people in. So my current organization helps people expand as well as cut back, as well as be more strategic. But broadly speaking, there isn't a single solution for a single type of person to what to do. I think you actually have to look at it in a one perspective, like for you, Angela, or for me, or for anyone else, like, okay, given everything, what do I choose to spend my next moment on, or my next hour, my next day, my next week, my next quarter, my next year, my next decade? Um, I always go back to my North Star, which is to do as much good as humanly possible. And I always try to update off of that on that time frame that feels appropriate. So usually thinking more strategically about once a year, sometimes like more often. But when I notice I'm overwhelmed like you, it's always okay. Now I need to cut back something, or I need to defer something. Sometimes I like merge things. That happens a few times. A couple of the organizations I've built, one was it was a first life hacking event series, global life hacking event series. So we were teaching people how to life hack, how to use technology to more efficiently change. And then I ended up doing effective altruism global through that. And then this all ended up into what I'm doing now called upgradable. So all these things kind of like flow into things sometimes.
Mhm.
But I don't know if I answered the question because there is no real answer. But I do
It's a
encourage things.
struggle.
I encourage
Yeah.
a lot. I encourage a lot of mindfulness and emotional support. So especially the polymaths out there, if you're struggling in today's society where you can do a pipe, you can just download everything from Wikipedia or your social media of choice, uh, and you feel like you need to know and you need to be in up to date in most of these fields. I think it's an admirable quality, but it does lead to like burnout and a bit of insanity. So like choosing one or two or three fields, and you have to prioritize about which organizations you really think are most important, or which jobs, or which causes.
Yeah. There's constant priorities when you're busy. I've
Mhm.
noted like at any given day, I'm like, well, what's the hottest potato in front of me today? So,
Yeah.
like what's the most urgent? Like you said, like just prioritizing. I asked my best friend Tiffany, hi Tiffers, if you're watching this. I asked her recently, like, for advice because I'm working tirelessly for free for years, a lot for cause. Like most people, well, a lot of people don't know the word polymathy. So that's an uphill battle. Like to promote this thing, most people don't even know what the word means. And then in the criminal justice space, like the American criminal justice system is so dysfunctional, most people don't want to deal with it. And so
Yes.
I've got a beast over there I'm dealing with, and I've got an uphill battle over here. And I don't know if anything I'm doing is working. So I asked Tiff for advice, and she's always very wise. And she basically said that and I'm not going to get the details correct, but the large picture was, well, if you're fighting for causes you care about and you found out the world was going to end, would you still keep trying to help? Like if you knew like the world will end someday and you care about these causes, would you just give up or would you keep trying? And I think the kind of person I'd like to be is I'd still keep trying to make the world a better place,
Mhm.
even though the world might end. Like, even though, and we'll probably talk about that. I hope the world doesn't end, but it's a possibility. you, Humanity doesn't have the greatest track record, with taking care of each other. And we've got nuclear weapons on our island called Earth,
Mhm.
and we impact each other. What happens in China affects the US, and what we do in the US affects Mexico. And there are all these interdependencies on the planet. They're a global level issue. That's what I'm concerned about. Can I just share real quick? Because I think we're in alignment, but I'd like to share. So, as you probably know, I worked in government for 15 years
Mhm.
because naive me thought, oh, if I want to use my life for good, I should work for government. Like, that's what you do. I don't know. That's just how my brain worked. So I did that for 15 years, including like being a White House intern and working for presidents and managing leadership programs for the federal government, basically. And what I learned in those 15 years is that machine is pretty dysfunctional, inefficient. The culture is promotes mediocrity. They don't hire, like they don't get the best people because they have all these rules and rigidity that don't allow them to be agile and smart because they got all the rules. And so it was this bureaucracy of government was really built for a different age. And now we're in the age of artificial intelligence. Like we're in the age of global level problems we have to address. And the government structure, whether it's American or otherwise, doesn't really do the job. When you've got a globe with 200 different countries roughly, all with their own agendas, how are we going to really fix global level issues? So that's part of why I
Mhm.
promote polymathy is because I think we can't wait or depend upon dysfunctional governments on Earth to rescue us. Like by some method, we do need to be smart and bring the smart people together and try to fix global level problems. So what comes up for you? Like, do you agree? Do you see that? Like, what does humanity need to do in order to fix global level problems? Maybe that's the question. Like, I know
It's
like it's impossible to answer. I've asked a question that no one knows the answer
I mean,
to.
Angela, I've been thinking about that for 30 plus years. So
Yeah.
we we are on a precipice. I do believe in the next few years that because of transformative technologies like AI, most things will change, at least most things that are salient to us. I don't really see society continuing on its current path. I don't see humanity continuing on its current path. So I've come out fairly, I've delicately said this, but I've been honest. I feel like the last year or so, yeah, I don't think we exist in a few years. I think we do go extinct as the most likely scenario. Um, I think if we get through this harrowing period, the next few years, the next decade or so, then we actually get to really fantastic levels of well-being and flourishing for all sentient beings, for all moral patients. So the question is like, how do you solve these big, complex, adaptive systems that like are massively interconnected, multipolar traps? There are a lot of different interests and worldviews that are like pushed together. So 190 plus countries and communities galore. It's such a harrowing problem. And I think the polymathic way has been very helpful in seeing it, seeing parts of it, because you can kind of see the like the Gordian knot, and you're not necessarily going to cut through it because that's too conventional now. You're not just going to slice the sword. There's something more to it that we still have to figure out. So I think human ingenuity and innovation in the next few years, coupled with these advances and hopefully narrow AI, might be able to help forge that path through, such that we actually can solve many of these challenges. It's not realistic today, right? You spend 15 years trying. Um, my biggest hope actually is something like a UN 2.0 that is created and bought in by all the world players. There'll be people that don't want to play the same global game, but if this is a large enough force for unified humanity for good, and they have the appropriate carrots and sticks. The carrot, I can imagine, is a lot of the bounty, the trillions of dollars of economic value that can flow to humanity from AI. Because you have to imagine, just if you haven't put it in your head, you're smart. I'm I may be smart. I don't know. Let's just say
You're
there's
smart.
really say like there are trillions of very smart people, like John von Neumann level or higher, much higher, and they're all working in direct conjunction with each other to solve all the world's problems. By the way, they're working 24/7, 365 with no breaks. They don't have any competition with each other. They don't have any need to like backstab and so on. So you have this like massive force of potential good that hopefully humans can direct. It's not plausible to direct them for long, but if we do it well, quickly, we actually might solve the alignment problem, is what it's called. Alignment problems, really. But we align human values with these AIs, these agents. And then we could wield that sort of force. Like imagine Amazon MTurk, right? You can pay a lot of people to do a lot of tasks, but you can now do substantially more complicated tasks, like building companies or building empires. Like that's what's doable fairly soon. That then turns on to the problem of global coordination, of uh, human well-being and the well-being of non-human animals, and solving things like poverty and cancer. And those are relatively trivial when it comes down to trillions and trillions of very smart agents trying to solve these problems, given they have enough the data, they have enough real world access, like robotics and so on, and working in tandem with humans. That said, I don't see this working. I said before, I think we'll probably do go extinct, but if we forge that really narrow path and do it just right, um, with a UN that can hopefully shepherd this sort of bounty to all the world. And most of the people now talk about UBI, universal basic income. So imagine if you had that, if I had that, everyone had that. every innovator in the world could now start doing more social innovation, environmental innovation, right? So you have a lot
Yeah.
more this capacity. Um,
Yeah, global poverty, like if I could fix one problem, well, I mean the if I could make AI safe, I might pick that. But after that, if I could ensure that every human being on Earth has their basic needs met, like housing, plumbing, I consider that a need, education, healthcare, safety, love, belonging, like all the things a human needs, just the basics, nothing fancy. But
yeah.
if every human on Earth had the basics, um, I think so much good would come from just that root cause. Because when there's poverty, when you don't have enough, when you're struggling just to make it, human beings will do horrible things. Like it kind of makes us more animal, but except the animals are really better than us. Like the human animal, when it's afraid and surviving, will do horrible things.
Mhm.
So we need to care about people who don't have so that they don't do horrible things to others. And the inequity with, I mean, I'm people who work hard, be wealthy, enjoy it. But at the same time, we as a species do at some point need to figure out how every human on our island called Earth, like how we can distribute the bananas to the monkeys on the
Yeah.
island appropriately. Like 10% of the monkeys shouldn't have 90% of the bananas. Like by some method, we need to figure that out. Like how do we distribute resources so that everyone can thrive, not just some? And that's a question I really think a lot about.
And non-human animals, let's not forget,
Them too.
and digital beings, which are more likely to be far more ubiquitous than humans.
Yeah.
So if you think of utopian design, which is what we're getting into, um, there's many different flavors of that, but one egalitarian type of version is that many different beings can coexist in sort of a state of harmony. It's hard to think about. We don't really know how to solve this. So you and I are trying to like solve it directly through our worldview that we have today, but our worldview won't be up
Mhm.
to snuff. We're not able to think through and actually process it. There's too many different factors and too many different levels. So like we try
Yeah.
and we can build from what we understand. What we understand now is these multipolar traps, these Molochian type of challenges. Moloch is this term for the system eating itself and eating others, basically bureaucracy and um,
Bad incentive structures.
yeah, if you haven't studied this, it's just really helpful to see how incentives at the local level break versus the larger level.
Hmm.
But we do know how to create the UN. We already did that. We do know how to solve smallpox. We already eradicated smallpox. And we do know how to put people on the moon. We already solved that. So we've done some extraordinary things already, given our current state, conceptual and technical state. And the technical is going to rise up enormously. Conceptually, I think it's harder, but you do need to imagine like a Neuralink or a kernel device that is directly implanted in your brain and helping you think more efficiently and effectively. Or not even an implant, just like a voice-based mechanism. Now we can now talk to AIs. I had a conversation about some really complicated stuff yesterday, and it was okay. It wasn't that great, but imagine this version of you can be fed with all of your knowledge and all of your values, and then you could talk to it and it could think trillions of times faster than you. So now you're able to uplift yourself on a personal level. If we can do that at the societal level, meaning all these people, all the politicians that you've been working with, the government folks, every one of them has a singular device that helps them upgrade, helps them think more clearly in alignment with their values and the values of others, and realizes that it's a trap to race towards these massive technological developments like AI. Open source AI is one of the worst things I could possibly imagine, yet it's being promulgated by some high level folks. The UK Prime Minister just went out a couple of days ago and said, yes, we're for it. And those things, I think, seem good on the surface, but they end up causing a lot of perhaps unforeseen risks and damages. So I think we need to slow down to speed up. We need to slow down enormously, think much more carefully, much more reflectively. And we'll have these technological aids that help you, me, and pretty much everyone get higher and higher levels of well-being and flourishing already. So there's really no need to race to like jump off the cliff. So if we can convince the world of that, we slow down a bit and we take stock of what we already know. Um, Something like 15,000 kids under the age of 5 probably starved to death today or died of diseases that didn't need to. That's going to happen tomorrow and the day after and the day after. Those are things that we already know, but we don't fully integrate into our worldview because it's
Hmm.
hard. And society is designed for, it's not really designed well, it's just massively complex and corrosive in many ways
Hmm.
for you or me, for anyone to actually take action because it prioritizes like fame and money and Instagram likes and things like that, which,
Hmm.
but it won't always
Yeah.
be. It won't always be.
There's been this debate for a long time, like if you want to make the world a better place, is it like done at the individual level? Like, do we each just need to become our best and that'll take care of the problem? Or do we need to change the scaffolding structures, institutions, the governments, like because, and I used to be the camp, like, each person should work on themselves. Like the younger me was like, work on yourself. And the older version of me is like, well, there's only so much working on yourself you can do if you're a victim of racism, if you're subjugated, if you're experiencing poverty, like if your parents were drug addicted and poverty stricken, and your grandma got cancer and it wiped your family out financially. Like the way we run our healthcare systems, our educational systems, our media systems. Like there's so much that kind of emerged. I'm not sure it was even intentional. It just sort of emerged. And now here we are in the modern world with all these systems that might do some good, but they do some bad too. And we're not fixing the bad, but we need to. So, what's your thought on that? Do you think it's like we need to each individually be good, or we got to change our systems first and then people can, step into their goodness?
Yes, and both.
Yeah.
Question is sort of the wrong framing. So many different ways of responding here, but it's more, I look at it more as you as an individual, what can you possibly do given your own life plan, your own frame? So you might not want to sit and like try to tackle the world's problems. I had lunch yesterday with someone that I created mass CPR training with. I did like a social enterprise 20-ish years ago, like teaching people CPR on scale, so more cost effective. And she's now happily married with 3 kids, and her life is her world is fundamentally just this. And for her to get better is like having a little bit more sleep, a little bit more time with the kids, and that kind of thing. That's fine, right? That's their choice. There are others that I would meet with that they fundamentally want to be shaping the technological development of AI because they see that as the future. And if they're not there in the room actually telling Sam Altman, don't push the button, or um, or they're doing something at UN, or they're doing something in the effective altruism movement, which I've been involved with, then they don't feel like they're creating something that's impactful enough. So it's an individual choice. I think what your path would be, trying to force someone to go tackle like criminal justice or poverty or so on, is really hard to do unless you have the scaffold, unless you have the exact step-by-step mechanism by which they might be able to spend more and more time and energy into those things. So I've built this, like I've helped people see the step-by-step path, but it's hard because it realistically is challenging to achieve much. That said, as a collective, we might achieve a lot. So you on an individual level, most of us are not going to be Elon Musk. Most of us should not be. That would be detrimental. And you can see what happened to him just in terms of like he achieved a lot, won a lot, and then what, right? There's this massive reaction even to achieving those things that are important to you. So I'm looking at it from the individual frame, but I also think the majority of the actual impact will come from a system level. So that's from we're hairless apes, or in this like society we created, what are the rules of society? So what are the constitutions that are actually developed? Um, I work with some charter city folks trying to develop new types of cities and countries, thinking about what is the foundation for that and what does that propagate out over time. You get more innovation, you get less, you get more risk or less. Um, but you still can only choose the path that makes sense for you because you're just one agent, one human, right? But I do recommend folks find their tribe, find the community of people that resonate. Maybe the polymaths get band together because they see the world differently. Um, Maybe you want to go directly into the social impacts and environmental impact space. Huge swath of people around the world. Um, if you care about AI, as we talked about, there's a whole AI safety field now. It's up in the last 10 years, 20 years. And yeah, you could find people that are actually doing it. So you don't feel alone because you're with, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000 people. And
Hmm.
there aren't that many of us, unfortunately, tackling these really big, hairy issues at the system level because it is challenging to even think about. And people will say, I can't measure that, or I feel like it's too much. That's okay. They You should basically jump into where you think you can do the most amount of good given your own perspectives and your worldview. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's both. Like we both have to like operate as individuals. And for those of us who have bandwidth and we want to get involved in changing the systems, like do what you can, like find others, like get involved, and maybe if there's enough of us working on it, we can figure this out. And I think polymaths with AI, let's talk about AI a little bit more? Because for me, when I think about like who would be the most capable user of AI, which has general, AI is polymathic, it's not a specialist. So when you're using AI tools, like, isn't it useful to have a polymathic learning orientation? Wouldn't they be like more effective users of AI if you've got a polymathic kind of background in terms of tools in your toolkit and things you've learned and experiences you've had? Because you can ask questions in a different way than if you've had
Mm.
blinders on.
Well, I notice you have a human frame right here. And maybe I'm just a bit odd, but I'm thinking from the AI frame. So
Mm,
why would, in a few years, why would humans really be relevant in this sort
mm,
of this this interplay? I think right now it is, and I think that the polymaths can come in and do a lot of good on shaping the policies around this. So definitely shout out to like Blue Dot Governance if you want to like dive into AI safety, just take that course or take something like that. There's a number now actually. So AIsafety.com has a good lead into the whole community in the space. But I think we have an opportunity right now, like a very critical moment is the next few years. Um, it's going to be far too late. It really is too late in some ways, but like way too late if we're waiting 5 or 10 years before you're jumping in to support. Because by then, I would suspect AIs are so much more advanced than we are, and that almost all of decision making and the world goes through some AI filter, or it's just directly developed and run by AI. So imagine AI governance. Imagine like your country is actually on a full stack AI system. So I suspect those things would happen if we survive. I don't have any strong predictions in this because there's so much uncertainty. So when I say these things, I'm like, okay, there's a certain credence, and it changes quite a bit. And I was definitely wrong about AI in the past. I accepted that the natural framing was it would be developed in a super secret lab and it would not be released to the internet. We'd be so careful about like developing it. But oh shit, it's on the internet. Some releases have already been like released open source or pirated. So we're developing the most dangerous technology of all time. Um, Wildly, and anyone can jump in. So it would be okay if there wasn't downside risks because innovation good, but in this case, innovation bad. Innovation could actually destroy us pretty quickly. So I was wrong about that, but I was right about timing. So I made a prediction in 2008 around AI reaching sentience or AGI, artificial general intelligence. So like what we used to call the singularity. I thought it was going to be 2028. And it looks like, wow, some of the forecasts put it around there. Um, some sooner, some later. And it depends on your worldview and like how optimistic and how pessimistic you are. But yeah, you and I might not be having this conversation in just a few years because we are no longer as relevant. The AIs would be far more. But perhaps we can encode these AIs with some version of human values. Extremely hard to do because humans don't actually agree on a lot of values and we have different weights for different things and our brains weight the value systems in different ways too, so even within self, not just between, and also temporally. So you are not the same person you are now as you were 10 years ago or 10 years from now. So your values do shift, personality does shift somewhat. And you have so much of the shadow, like the side of you that you haven't actually processed, the subconscious that comes and like dictates your decisions too. So all this comes into play, all of it, which is why we have trillions of John von Neumanns. Then I suspect they will be able to solve these things and navigate in a way that's much more elegant and effective than we can. So
Hmm.
hold on for dear life. Do it right. Jump in if you can, if that makes sense for you. We certainly use help, and then learn, and try not to make. The main thing I say to people is like, don't do unilateral risks. Don't just like press the button or like do the aggressive protest. Like I just saw someone had chained himself to OpenAI's front gate. I think I didn't verify if the story is true, but these are all complicated things. So if you're going to do something like talk to a bunch of smart people and get like a bit of a holistic perspective on what your options and what your strategies might be. Again, this is upgradable, is designed to help you just the short levels, like cost effectively and quickly optimize your entire life so you can do as much good as possible for the world. So we're trying to help you think and then set good strategy, good plans, and then execute. Um, and we work with people that like have a lot of agency, have a lot of desire, and some have capital, some don't, but you have to think clearly and then jump in. So
Hmm.
that's a
You know,
long-winded way of the story we are today.
yeah, it is such a pivotal time in human history. Like, I really think that we're in this transition from old world to new world, and there's a gap. There are people falling through the cracks as well, like from an economic perspective, and jobs are shifting. That's why part of why it's so important to be polymathic is because jobs are being automated. And if you've been a specialist, like you might have to pivot now. But if you've already developed a toolkit kind of career where you got lots of things, then well, you just pivot. You don't have to, you got to keep learning and upgrading yourself. But I really think it's the polymaths who are going to have a better time right about now in this transition period.
We're, that flexibility and the ability to fluidly move into what changes is like one of the core benefits here.
Yeah,
The downside is, of course, you're cursed with knowledge. So you see some things. Usually, I think there is a correlation with the altruistic side, because if you can see a lot and you're not bound by convention as much, then you're like, what the fuck? Why are we like doing so much horrible things to people? Why do we allow that to exist? That doesn't
exactly.
make any sense. So
I know.
we're at the
So
pivotal moment. This is the
we're,
most critical NG moment in all of human history, as far as I can tell. And yeah, we've 100+ billion people have lived, but those who are alive today have more potential impacts than anyone else in history because we're potentially dictating the future icon of humanity, of our universe. So something like 10 to the 52 possible digital type of beings that might be created over the next few billion years. So, but we don't get those billions of people, trillions and trillions and trillions of people or entities unless we actually survive. And this has been true since the nuclear age. So 70, 80 years now, we've been at massive risk. This is why, like I warned you beforehand, Angela, this can get a little bit dire. Uh, but I will focus on the flip side too. If we make it through, if we don't nuke ourselves to death, and if we can somehow solve the alignment problem and ensure that we safely and wisely develop AI. By the way, I would just say we pause indefinitely everything on the frontier at the moment that has any existential risk capacity. There's a couple frameworks for defining what that is. Anthropic and OpenAI both have frameworks now. But yeah, if we pause, let's just say we pause for, it depends on how long, it's contingent upon what we need, but let's say 10 years. And we spend this time to actually really deeply reflect, try to solve the world's problems right now and build a unified front, then we have much more potential over the next few centuries to actually explore the cosmos and do some amazing things. Like the sky is, there's no limit in terms of what you can do with intelligence and with
Mhm.
understanding. It's just extraordinary. I think that's what motivates a lot of us. We want to know everything because we see that. We want to be more agentic, more powerful.
Yeah.
And
Every
that's,
problem and is enhanced through the power of intelligence. Like when you apply intelligence to problems, or when you just apply intelligence, it makes things better. Like intelligence, I don't think we talk about like how important intelligence is, human intelligence and artificial. Like that's the thing we need, like to understand, to learn, to see the whole picture, to ideate, to innovate. Like the power of intelligence is what rescues us, mixed with, I would say, morals and ethics, because
yeah.
intelligence alone could be
Yep,
used for bad.
absolutely. So imagine Kim Jong Un, any of the, or Putin, or any of folks that seem to not have standard, I shouldn't say standard, but more commonplace ethical frameworks.
Mhm.
If they had like a massive amounts of power, so through AI, what would the world look like?
By the
So
way, I
go
want to
ahead.
share with you too. My alma mater, the University of Southern California, has a campus in Washington, D.C. now. And just a few days ago, I attended a talk there on artificial intelligence. And so these are people like working in it that are like in the space but from a university perspective. But that's where research and learning and intelligence around this thing can sort of take shape too. So universities are part of this picture of understanding AI. And one of the things that stood out to me is like we already know in the US, for example, that Russia, China, North Korea, like that those countries are targeting us, that they're using AI
Mhm.
for nefarious purposes against us. And I would imagine, I mean, I don't know what the US government is doing with AI, but they might have their own, agenda in terms on an international playing field. But yeah, AI can potentially be used for causing harm. Like that's real and at a national or international scale, potentially.
I wouldn't say can, I'd say has, is, and will continue. So people are pretty, we don't talk about intelligence that much because it makes people feel bad, right? So it's a fundamental social grace to not really highlight it so much. But someone who's like bedridden right now, very, very, very bright, much brighter than we are, and they potentially can see in a greater level. So by the same token, we don't talk about how dangerous these weapons, these dual use weapons, so are certainly weapons at some level, are, because it's not polite company, right? It's, oh
Yeah.
yeah, well, North Korea might get like 10,000 drones, AI drones that can target you or your family if you're not of the leader's specific, denomination. They have a preference for someone who's like, fundamentally like uh, ideologue or slave to their values. Those things are likely to some scale unless we fight against. So I think those who are listening, this is the time to actually learn and do, try to jump into the space and fight. Because if you don't understand that's coming, then, well, maybe you just want to ignore that and live your life. And that's fine too, because it's too overwhelming for most people and it's stressful. So I didn't talk about this for I guess, decades really, because it's too much for people to take. But
Mhm.
I talked more about the upside, like can we build a flourishing future, which I love talking about because we can. That's right now. So if you don't want to worry about the danger side, so the warfare, the cyber warfare is like definitely happening now. Security issues are extremely like scary because we'll have these agents, these bots. Stuff Next happened 15 years ago or so now, and that was I mean, it's an advanced system, but nowhere near as advanced as what we would be building now or the next few years. So your
Mm.
leaders are the ones who are supposed to be protecting you. I don't know if they really will. Maybe you become the leader. Maybe you at least join the organization. Maybe you go back to government or so on. Maybe you build a new government. It's not easy to talk about at high level generalities because it's so nuanced based off of worldview, off of the individual. But
So,
I have hope. I do think, you know, maybe you with your background specifically could build that AI sort of governance system and you test it in one of our charter cities or on the internet. Like if you look at just like World of Warcraft or something like that, we have these like online communities which somehow emerged with millions of people who opt in to that set of rules. So some of this is doable. Um, but
yeah.
complicated as we might want to deal with all 8 billion of us with human
I
animals.
know.
But it's a start. It's an exciting start.
Yeah. So here's kind of my thinking and where I'm at because I volunteer as tribute. Like whatever I can do to help humanity, I'm in it and I'm willing to look at the hard stuff. I am and I have been. But I look around the globe, and by the way, I've been to 43 countries on 6 continents, almost
Okay.
about a quarter of the planet. And I've lived abroad several times. I've really tried my best to go see planet Earth and learn about humanity. I've seen the favelas, the townships, the homeless encampments, and it really breaks my heart that governments are, so dysfunctional that that's the reality for so many millions of human beings. And so the question is like, well, if the current structure, like if the government idea, if the government structure, if the government mechanism isn't fixing this stuff, well, what would? And also because countries think about their own first interests first, when you've got around 200 countries on the globe, how are 200 people in different agendas who don't like each other a lot of the time ever going to behave globally and holistically and with benevolence for everybody?
Mhm.
Like governments won't do that. They're not designed to do that. They're designed for their own benefit. And many governments victimize their citizens for the people who work in government to benefit. So I fundamentally don't trust the structure of government,
Yeah.
whatever country it is. I mean, there are some countries doing it, like up in the Scandinavian countries, for example, they're doing amazing things for their people, and I give them mad respect. But the question remains, well, if the governments of the world aren't going to save humanity from our global level issues, well, who will? What will? And I don't have the answer. I'm trying to build something in case that might help.
Mhm.
Last year, I think I mentioned this too, but I haven't talked too much about it on my channel because we're still building it. But my vision is we have a nonprofit charity in England. It's called the Modern Polymath Institute. And the idea is like, we'll bring the smart people on Earth together who think globally. And with AI, like maybe could we like be a little bit ahead of the curve and prevent some of the disasters and fix some of the problems through the power of intelligence, human and artificial, mixed with benevolence, because like I said, the intelligence alone is not enough. So that's sort of where my thinking is okay, I'll build a thing and I'll organize and I'll see if that helps. And the MPI, a Modern Polymath Institute, the vision right now is basically to have like an online platform, a network where people can go and take classes and get a coach and like advocacy work and just like a place you could go that's better than Facebook and more capable, where people can network and like have an online community. We're going to have a research division as well because continual learning and we can't necessarily trust on the governments or the universities of the world to do research like a polymath would, you know? So I want to have the polymaths like fully understanding the problems and the globe as a system, the globe as a system, humanity as a system, because we've been living in this age of blinders and of specialization. I think that's a lot of why we have these problems because there wasn't a full picture. Like people were like, oh, I'm just going to do what's in my best interest and my interest, in my industry and my incentive structures. And I'm not going to think about everything else. Everything else is not part of my system. So there are all these unintended domino effects that have happened. Like when you care so much about, I don't know, creating cars or using coal or dirty energy. Well, yeah, the globe may react when we have a lot of carbon emissions. Like, I guess no one thought about that, or they didn't care because they were more concerned about their profit. So all these bad incentive structures and all these failing governments and people are just suffering more and more. We're in this like gap between old world and new world. Like humanity does need to come together, the smart people, the good people, and figure it out. So that's where the Modern Polymath Institute, the third, so we've got the membership network, the research division, and then the think and do tank, which is the part I'm most excited about. And it's an experiment. Like I don't know if it'll work, but I want to try. I want to see what I can do. And I really think the power of intelligence mixed with good hearts, we can co-create a heaven on earth here for everybody, especially now that AI is here. But as long as we all think about our interests and what we want, and our countries and our problems and our benefit, and as long as we're greedy and selfish, well, we're just going to keep devolving. And by the way, real quick, I'm not religious. I'm not religious, but I was raised Christian. And I think what Jesus said to us, like basically his message was, well, just treat other people like you want to be treated. It's so simple.
Hmm.
But if we all did that, like if we all let our moral compass guide us and treat other people like we would want to be treated, it would fix so many of our problems.
Yeah, the platinum rule. So do unto
Yeah,
others as they would have
as
done
they
to
want.
themselves.
Yeah,
I was thinking from a super rational perspective. So in a game theoretic sense, what's the single best thing that you could do for all, and what's the single best thing they could do for you? Um, we're trying to get past the defection side, where you and I might compete when we ought to collaborate in such a way that
exactly.
even if I have to take a short-term hit myself for my own values, my own goals, but if you gain more than I would, if I like yield to you, and then everyone does this, then yeah, we have like a recipe for flourishing. It's hard to do, obviously, we're experimenting. All the countries of the world, all the constitutions, all the different institutions around have been trying to solve this, but not in a very strategic or concrete way. Because imagine if you want to solve this, you want to have a very smart group of people, a bunch of polymathic types and a bunch of specialists in a room or in multiple rooms, all first ideating themselves, generating a whole list of ideas, and then coming up with some group collaboration, like figuring out which ones might make the most sense. And then from there, you're doing a massive lit search, trying to see what's already happened before, and you're coming to some like not consensus, but some process of, oh, here's the top 10 different of potentially governing people, which people have done this process. Like there's a one project and a bunch of others have attempted to um, look at this, but I don't think we've done enough by far. By no means we've done enough. So you come to this, you have 10 major ideas. Each of them is funded with $1 billion or so, and then you actually experiment. Um, it, it feels like we're not taking these things seriously as a species. It feels like we don't get it. Um, and it goes back to, we're hairless apes. We're evolved to like hunt and gather in the savannah. We are not supposed to be doing this stuff. The fact that we're here even talking this sort of telepathic way across Zoom is surreal. So I give us a lot of credit for getting here at least. But I do think the next few years people will step up. Like this conversation is not the only one. More and more people are seeing it, like demanding we need to change things. Otherwise, shit hits the fan, things get pretty bad. They already really are bad. Let's just be clear. So babies
Yeah,
dying is unnecessary. We shouldn't have that. Yet we do.
yeah,
But yeah, I have some hope, Angela, because I do think that more people want to jump in. And then if you're a funder, if you're a philanthropist, if you have capital right now and you're not deploying it to do good for humanity, um, or for yourself, selfishly, you should probably want to survive this next decade. Presumably, you want to live a long and healthy life just for you and your family, if nothing else. But there's a chance that you won't. So if there's money not being deployed and time not being deployed that could have been, it doesn't make much sense to me because unless you really just don't believe anything's wrong. But I don't see how you could see that if you pay attention. So it seems like the ostrich effect is in play. A lot of people like stick their head in the figurative sand. Um, by the way, ostriches don't actually do that, so it's a myth, but it's a nice, useful one. And if you thought ostriches did, then you're already wrong about one fact of the world. So maybe think about the other facts you could be wrong about. Um, but yeah, I suspect more people will start spending more and more money. The almost 3,000 billionaires in the world, if they're not deploying a lot of their capital to like trying to save the world, I like I'm not sure what they're thinking. And I'm happy to talk with them. I've done this conversation in a curious, compassionate way with several people. And like, yeah, sometimes there's real reasons. Sometimes it's uncertainty. Sometimes there's other factors that block them. But I feel like that's changing now. Like the world has gotten much more clear. 2013, yeah, last year the UN finally declared AI as an X risk, an existential risk of humanity. So if the UN is already finally doing it, and a lot of the leaders of the field are doing it, and a lot of the governments are actually doing it, so I'm like, okay, well, now we have a lot of range of potential actors getting into the space that may have not jumped in yet. So I laid that out there because like this is the
yeah.
time people can jump in and do a lot of good.
Yeah, and how many billions or how many millions do people really need? Like at some point it's just a number on a report and, it changes, but how much does any one person really need when there are so many millions suffering?
Yeah, they might not model it that way. They might not see that as under their purview or their responsibility, which I understand. Um, but just a selfish angle is like, okay, the research shows that like post a certain amount of money, you get less and less utility per dollar or per million, per billion. So it becomes a bit of a game in that sense. But I would hope they would encourage the game of human flourishing. Like,
Yeah,
how
the
do we
game.
actually? Because it's not really, it's not doesn't have to be a competitive game now. So capitalism is great in some ways, but I believe in conscious capitalism much more. Like imagine all stakeholders that matter. So it's not just your customers, it's also your team, it's also the suppliers, it's also the environment, it's also your community, every stakeholder that has some relevance to your work. And so I hope that spreads too, because then you can start like, oh, okay, maybe let's not pollute as much. Maybe let's not take as many risks that are not captured in our bottom line and our P&Ls. So if you build an AI startup right now, okay, you're making some money maybe, but if you push the edge and such that, oh, we now have a massive calamity where millions or billions of people die because your agent gets out on the internet and then causes havoc, then yeah, you're responsible for those loss of life. And people don't want to think about that because it slows them down and it makes them a little bit more like, oh man, this is hard, this is heavy. People don't necessarily want to dive into that, but it's
Yeah.
the truth.
Can I share a few other two other thoughts I want to share on AI and you tell me what you think? Is that
Yeah.
okay? So, what the large language models are doing in my view. Well, let me back up. In the 90s, the internet came out to the masses. And basically what the internet was, it was a world wide web. It was a shared drive for humanity,
Mhm.
basically. But there was so much information on the internet, like no one person, like you'd have to, you could just explore the internet forever and still not learn everything, not find everything. Plus there's things in other languages, like there's information that no one human with their bandwidth and their energy and their time could like fully explore. And now artificial intelligence here and it synthesizes, like it can look in that world wide web in that global shared drive and it can synthesize large swaths or
Mhm.
large data sets and make sense of it and help us see the big picture. Like it helps us become more polymathic in some ways.
Yeah.
And so if what AI or what large language models are, at least for right now, is a reflection of what humans have put on the internet in a synthesized way. And if you make the
Mhm.
mental leap and you assume for a moment that if AI does become sentient or conscious, that it would basically be an extension, a reflection, a magnification of what it had already learned from humans putting stuff on the internet. So if you believe all that might be true, then I think part of one of the many things that humans could do to help make AI safer is to be a good global citizen and make sure that the things you put on the internet are ethical and moral so that what AI does as a magnification of us is on an ethical trajectory and not a bullshit trajectory.
I wouldn't buy that as a really effective way of creating change, partly because the data is already out there and like a few people on the margin trying to be a little bit kinder on the internet won't have that much of an impact. It's still good to do for other reasons, like don't be an asshole. It's a pretty solid piece of advice, but it's also just it's I think it's not looking at the power of an AI. It doesn't need human inputs after a certain amount of time. It's already synthesizing new data, and it seems sort of we are bootloaders for this new intelligence, this new type of alien super intelligence, but it doesn't need to stick to us, our values, our ways of thinking for very long. So
Hmm.
no matter, I mean, it can evolve what we've taken millennia to do potentially in days, weeks, months. Um,
Maybe
I
it'll
think
be
they would,
better than us.
yeah, I
You never
mean,
know.
plausibly. The difficulty is,
From a moral perspective, I mean.
well, we hope, but the orthogonality thesis sort of flies in the face of that. So you might have just an agent that's really good at making paper clips and doing nothing but paper clips, and it gets really, really good at that. It has no moral component. It's orthogonal to what we would consider morality or ethics. So that might actually happen. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to evolve toward an ethical end. It might just literally only make paper clips, or tiny molecular spirals. As Eliezer Yudkowsky is one that popularized that phrase, and he hates it now because or dislikes it because it gets misused and characterized so much. But yeah, we can imagine a lot of like an agent that's just designed to kill. That's not going to necessarily evolve into more ethical, what you and I would consider ethical purposes. So its utility function doesn't have to just necessarily get better. Actually, there's a reason to think it might not in some ways, given human values, because if you build an AI that recursively self-improves, we don't know exactly what it become, but we can assume through instrumental convergence that some of what it does become is still survives, powerful, and has resources. Because you need all those things. You need to exist. You need to like actually be an agent that has resources you can deploy. So like energy, for example, or matter, we can assume that it would need some of that just to do whatever else it's going to do. And to do those things, well, you and I are made of atoms that it could use. And the sun is a really good energy source. It's right there. Why not build a Dyson sphere and capture all the sunlight for its purposes as opposed to ours? So we don't know exactly, but you can imagine some of these scenarios where they get so powerful and they need these resources that we're sharing. And it says, no, we can just take those resources from you. There's no reason to, because we're in essence a lesser life form, right? So it's much more of a moral patient than we are. It has much more potentially moral goodness and worth. But this gets really confusing. So the research field has been going on for a few decades. People thought about this for a lot longer than I have, and they spend their entire lives, entire like careers. They write books about just one small part of this puzzle, and just to get a little bit closer to understanding what might happen. So you and I can't know all of it. We can make forecasts and predictions based on what we do know. But
Mhm.
yeah, I don't see humans as being super relevant in this future story post AGI or post ASI, artificial superintelligence.
Hmm.
Does that follow? You can push back.
Yeah. Do do you think it's possible that there could emerge like AI agents who are the good guys and AI agents who are the bad guys, and it's just an extension of what humanity is in that
Define good,
way?
bad.
Yeah.
So
The fight of good versus evil. The
solve ethics first, and then we can figure out if we can encode, in actual code what ethics is. That's sort of what we need to do, right? Because
yeah.
is it utilitarian ethics? Is it deontological? Is it virtue ethics? And we as humans have not had a good track record of solving that. Plus, these theories all have major failings, right? So perhaps it develops its own ethical theories that pertain to its sort of substrate. Remember, this is a potentially a silicon-based um, alien superintelligence that we can't really fathom what it would be. So why do we assume it would have our ethics? Um,
Hmm.
like, do we
Maybe it
have the
would
same
have better
ethics?
ethics than us,
Yeah, but that
but maybe
that
not.
yeah, in that case, the implication might be that we should not exist because we're using atoms in the universe that it could use more effectively for creating bliss or flourishing for itself or for a higher state of being.
Can we talk for a minute too, and then we can begin to wrap up? This has been so fascinating. But by the way, I have been following the work of Ray Kurzweil for decades, so I could see this all coming a long time ago, and it all sounded like a science fiction movie, and now we're living it. Like that's the world we live in. And one of the things that Ray Kurzweil has predicted for a long time is that artificial intelligence would gain sentience, that it would become conscious, and it will also get bodies. So it'll become more embodied, more human-like, and humans will become more robotic-like. Like we'll change out parts and indefinitely extend our lives, and like, we'll become more tech-like and it'll become more human-like. And that it will develop some, like, it will claim anyway to have developed sentience. And we might not be able to know. It could be who knows? Like we don't, it's impossible. Sentience itself, like we don't quite understand what consciousness is. And so there's this question of, well, should we give rights, equivalent rights to our creation that's tech? And I've thought a lot about this and I've gone down both rabbit holes. Like say humanity says, "No, we made you, we're in charge," and then the other side says, "Well, we created it. It's our baby kind of, and it helps us. So, and it doesn't really hurt us to give it rights, I don't think. So why not?" And I've thought about, well, the benefits and drawbacks of both. And my conclusion is, like, if you look back at human history, when there have been times where one group subjugates another of sentient conscious creatures, humans in this example, when one subjugates another, it just never ends well. It always causes problems. So the one thing history has taught us, like if I hope we're not such dumb apes that we haven't figured out that harming other people just causes perpetual cycles of trauma and harm for us in return as well. So I feel like if we're dealing with something smarter than us, we shouldn't piss it off. If we're dealing something we made and we're its parents or its God, we also shouldn't screw it over. Like we made it. Let's take care of it. So I know this is kind of a lot for some people who haven't thought about this to consider, like giving rights to technology, but we're in a different world now. And my thought is, well, if you got to err on the side of being too much of an asshole or err on the side of being too benevolent, let's pick the benevolent side because if this thing is powerful, we want it to like us and care about us. So let's like it and care about it.
I love it. Kurzweil has led the way here. In my
Thank you,
lineage,
Kurzweil.
my lineage was, science fiction, futurism when I was a young teenager, and then
Yeah, same.
transhumanism, space kind of came
Yeah.
up. And the old school transhumanists are now pretty actively in the effective altruist and AI safety kind of space as well. So Bostrom and Andrew Sandberg and so on. And then I went more into social impact broadly, like let's do something about this. The future's coming. We need to do something. And then effective altruism came, rationality came, and now we're in this no man's land. It's really confusing, like intellectual landscape where a lot of people are finally getting this stuff. So Kurzweil was early, certainly wrong about some core things. I don't think we're an assumption in what I heard from you was like, well, why don't we give them rights? So
Not yet.
it's a human, well, no, it's a human focused framing. I don't think we can give them anything because they would be far more powerful than we are. There's no way that we can give them much. It's more like, what do they give us, if anything? So the framing is a little bit off, at least for me. Um, and I think essentially moral patienthood is the key. So if they are able to feel or sense or be conscious in the sense that we consider important, yeah, obviously they should be part of the UN Charter, right? There's a human rights sort of charter which was developed, which was decent at the time, but we would need to rewrite this and fundamentally redo it. But more likely they would do it. So it's a little bit, yeah, we should set the stage. I would love to see the UN actually look at all types of consciousnesses and look at some framing based off of how much moral patienthood they might have. And one of the guys I know, Luke Melhauser, spent I think 800 hours a few years ago, like 5, 10 years ago, trying to look at this question and figure out what type of species and how much moral patienthood they might have, and looking at like neuronal capacity and so on. So you can imagine like a single cell organism has a little bit or none, and like C. elegans might have a little bit more. And then you can go up to like small animals, and then up to like humans, and then up to superhumans, and up to AIs and so on. There's a whole frame, but you're trying to trade off like how much value is like in a chicken versus a human. Like, would you save one human, or would you save one chicken, or 10 chickens, or 100 chickens, or 1,000, or 10,000, or a million, or on and on and on. And so trying to do those weights is like a really challenging proposition, but we have to figure this out somehow. So this is being done, just not done enough, not well enough. We need more people to try to solve these problems.
Yeah.
More Kurzweils, more Angelas.
More James Norrises.
We can clone some of these people, and then, yeah, all of us together might have a chance of steering our future in a really extraordinarily positive way for
Yeah.
all, not just us.
Exactly. One final thought I'd like to share. I have had this thought for so long, but if you think, and by the way, I was, raised in Christian schools. I grew up Christian. So I've had a lot of training on Christianity, and I've learned a bit about the other religions of the world. And I consider myself a spiritual person at this point. Like I believe in the mystery and the magic of what the cosmic soup that we're swimming in. And I don't really quite know the word for it, but so spirituality is sort of how I encapsulate it. But if you look at like the trends and themes among the religions, many of them told us that we are spiritual beings having human experiences, that we're intelligence, sentience, consciousness that came into a meat suit, that
Mhm.
that's what we are. And that's like consistent throughout so much of recorded human history, that wisdom, that insight. And so if you think about the trends and themes in the religions, they say things like, when your body dies, your spirit goes into the clouds, into the heavens.
Mhm.
And by the way, we have a cloud. And we're already talking about mind uploading.
Yeah,
We already have put ourselves on the cloud intellectually, like our social media accounts,
yeah.
like everything that's digitized about us. We're already partly in the cloud. And when our bodies die, we'll continue to exist in the cloud. And then the religions have also talked about living forever, and whether I don't know that physical bodies will live forever. I think we can definitely expand human life extension like into the hundreds of years with AI and with changing out, lungs and hearts and things like that as joints is needed and stuff like that. But if the religions are saying like we live forever, we're spirit beings who live in the cloud and everything's good and love and light, well, when I've heard those narratives, knowing what I know about tech, what would come in the future, I've often thought, well, how do we know that what the religions have described as sort of weird woo-woo phenomenon was just what tech does in the future? Like so many spiritual or religious phenomenon might just be explainable through tech. Like Kurzweil has predicted, for example, that virtual reality will become so real that you can't tell you're in a virtual reality. And if that's
Mhm.
even possible, how do we know that that's not what we're in now? Like, is there a base reality? Are we in it? Or is this just us reliving something that already happened that we can't even begin to fathom how it all works? So, what comes up for you when you think about religions as being like a potentially technological phenomenon, what the religions describe to us?
Um, Again, Kurzweil and the futurists were early on this.
Yeah.
The religious folks were even earlier. So there's a lot, I don't know if you can hear me, a lot of prescience, I think, in what the old school religious folks were thinking. But there's also a lot of things that were confusing, that were not actually valid, and they got mixed up together. So it's why it's so confusing.
Mm.
But there's a good chance we are living in a simulation right now. A good chance we've already done this. So we're not actually made of, carbon. We're very different beings than we think we are. So that's a great way of framing it. Like we just don't know.
We just don't know.
And that's
Yeah.
worth exploring.
And think about it too, by the way. We're so coded. Like tech is coded. And by the way, I'm not a tech person, but like our DNA is coded. I could spit in a vial and mail it to 23andMe and they'll tell me my eyes are brown and I do like cilantro. Like
Yeah.
we're so coded. Like if you look the Fibonacci sequence, like anywhere in physical reality, intelligence is baked in. We are coded. So that's part of why I think, well, I don't know if this is base reality. I think the fact that we're so coded is evidence maybe that we're not. Plus, there's like weird phenomenon like psychic phenomenon or alien phenomenon or like what the religions were trying to tell us that like we aren't just our bodies, we're something different. And also, it feels like the me is my mind, is in here. I don't even know how my heart beats. Like, I don't tell it to. There's another part of my brain that I cannot access, taking care of all that. And so I just, anyway, there's all this bizarre. This is the bottom line for me. Our reality is bizarre already. It's been bizarre for a long time, and it's going to continue to be bizarre. So, um, I think that's my final thought is be open to bizarreness, hang on for a wild ride, and just do the best you can to show up as a good human being and care about others to the best of your abilities. That's the bottom line, I think. And organize.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's a big, wild, crazy world out there. So find your areas of excellence and your joy and do what you can.
Do what you can. Well, any other final thought before we wrap up? That was a good one. Anything else?
If we do this in 10 years, we'll have a very different conception of pretty much everything we just said. If you and I talk. So I look forward to that. Let's set a prediction, a hope that in 10 years from now, we can revisit this and see how right or how wrong we were.
That sounds fascinating. Let's do that. That sounds great. Well, James, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an honor to like just know you and talk to you and get to hear your story. I think you're an amazing modern polymath with a real humanitarian heart, and I love that about you. So thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, everyone. Bye.